Welcome to The Creative Shift. My name is Dan Blank, author of the book Be the Gateway and founder of WeGrowMedia.com. Today, I'm sharing my interview with author Janae Marks, and there's so much that I find inspiring about her story and what she shares. So recently, she published her debut novel, and it did really well. It found a big audience. It has like 900 reviews on Amazon. It got starred reviews from all these amazing places. It made all these lists of books to read. I have to imagine it's everything that an author dreams of. And, this is what I do in the podcast. We tend to start at the beginning. We work through someone's career. And what I find so interesting about her story is often what I find is that she had written 3 other books before her debut got a deal. And these books, to my knowledge, remain unpublished this day. And in the process of trying to get those published, she'd queried more than 70 agents. And as she says, these are essentially 70 queries that ended up getting rejected. And I think that that's the thing that we don't always see as we learn about someone who found any kind of success with creative work. And again, it's why I love this focus for the podcast, is this idea of really digging into that journey, because everyone has a journey. It's different for everyone. And it's in these details that you realize what the creative process really is. Her debut was From the Desk of Zoe Washington, and her new book is called A Soft Place to Land. You can find out more about Janae at janaemarks.com. And if you want to see a video of us talking, you can watch the podcast over at WeGrowMedia.com and click on blog and podcast at the top. All right, here is my interview with Janae Marks. Hey everyone, this is Dan Blank. I'm really excited to be chatting with Janae Marks. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Very excited to be here being interviewed.
So the place I always like to start is this idea of when you were a kid, and I don't know whether this is age 3 or age 6 or age 12. Did you feel you had a sense of permission to create?
Absolutely. My parents definitely introduced me and, encouraged me to be creative from a very young age. My mom is definitely a creative person as well, not necessarily writing, but growing up, she was really into like fashion design, sewing, and, she would make my Halloween costumes when I grew up. So that kind of creativity and art. So yeah, I remember, early on, even before I really knew how to spell properly, I was creating my own little, books with a couple of sentences per page and a little illustration. I remember doing that really early on and just being really excited about that kind of stuff, and definitely, art projects. And I definitely feel like my imagination was allowed to kind of run wild in the household. So yeah, for sure.
Did that change once you started either going to school or interacting with other kids? Did that change it in any way, or was it your little secret that you were creative, or was it just part of who you were?
No, I think it would definitely continued on, because I feel like the friends that I made, we also were into being creative in different ways. Simple things like playing pretend and coming up with these elaborate situations that we were in, or with our dolls, or even I remember we had like an old camcorder and we would create like videos. My friends and I, like little skits that we would record ourselves, or dances. Record ourselves and rewatch them. And I remember even little things like when you realize that if you take a quick clip of yourself in a spot and then you jump out of the shot and then you turn it back on, it makes it look like you disappeared. I remember being super excited about coming up with things like that, realizing that we could do things like that. And yeah, so I had a lot of friends who also were into being creative. So I definitely feel like, yeah, I think I took a lot of classes too, like dance class. And so, yeah, creativity was always there. Even it was definitely a public thing. It wasn't something that I kept just to myself.
It's funny because the way you describe video is basically what we would now call TikTok. These little clips, little clips of dances and funny things with your friends. Now there's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Right. It's our little version of it.
You're an early influencer and didn't even know it. So you mentioned like dance class. What, I'll call it formal training, because I think it's a real difference. It's one thing to be like, I was a bored kid or I was a creative kid, but when you're enrolled in a class, what kinds of classes or communities did you take part in as a kid?
Yeah, I took I realized in like middle school, I think I started taking jazz and tap dancing in like the fifth grade. And I was definitely not, the best dancer ever. I think actually my parents put me in ballet when I was even younger, and when I was like maybe 3 years old, like the youngest age they allow you to be in the ballet class. But it was a little too intense for me because I think this particular ballet school was like really, oh, you have to bend bend this way or do that. And if I couldn't do it, I just felt, I think I ended up leaving that. But then I saw other people doing other kinds of dance that felt a little less, restrictive, I guess, or so strict about how you have to do it. Like you don't have to be so flexible to do tap dancing. So I did that. And I starting in definitely as I got older in high school, I started joining like the theater club in school and things like that. So I was taking dance. In middle school too, I joined the chorus, so I was always doing kind of singing, dancing, some acting, just a lot of that kind of stuff, and got really into musical theater in terms of watching it and listening to the soundtracks and things like that.
That's really cool. It's always interesting to me because I remember, theater kids, I guess, when I was growing up. And it was always like my memory of it, they were always my friends, but there was like a range of specialties. The kids who would sing, the kids who would dance, the kids who would act. And then, of course, many of them felt a desire or pressure, I don't really know which, to do more of them. If you're a singer who can dance or an actor who can sing, then that benefits. How were you exposed to that sort of thing, whether it's just consuming it through soundtracks or through going to theater, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think the first introduction was just going to the theater. I think my parents took me to see Beauty and the Beast on Broadway, and then in school, because I grew up in New Rochelle, New York, which is only about 30 minutes away from Manhattan. So, I think we took a school trip to see Cats on Broadway. And then, like you just start seeing like some of these shows either through school on a school trip or with my parents. And I just, I would get the soundtrack and I would just listen to it all the time. And so I just got really interested from there to start. And then in high school, I joined the theater group, and it was the kind of thing where, as a freshman, you were not really likely to get anything more than just like the backgrounds, because they had, like the theater director at that time was like, he had his favorites and kind of were always the leads. And so in the end, I kind of like drifted away from it because I kind of got frustrated by that. I felt like they weren't really giving other people a chance. So I ended up doing more community theater. Like my mom and took me to the Harlem School of the Arts, actually. So she would drive me into the city to take classes there. And I felt like it was much nicer because it was a smaller, it was a class you had to pay for, but it was like a smaller class, and you got a chance to really take a bunch of different things. So on a Saturday, I would spend my entire day there for like a couple of years, which was really fun. So yeah, and I really thought like at that time that I wanted to do theater. And then I got to college and realized, you know what, maybe not. But yeah, like for a long time, I really thought that I wanted to do it as my creative career thing.
It's funny because how you describe high school, I always think that's one of the key things between the passion of the, I guess I'll call it the amateur, the hobbyist versus professional, is that like in professions, it's like any job. There's politics, there's favoritism, there's all the things like that. It's interesting at what age you become really exposed to that and you get to make a choice.
Yeah, it was the kind of thing too where they would let everybody be in the play. I think they kind of, I don't know, like parents must have complained. So it was like, I remember we did a production of The Wizard of Oz, and there were like 30 munchkins. Like we were all munchkins, and there were like 30 to 40 of us on stage. It was way too many. And they just, because they wouldn't say no to anybody, but then they also like, always gave the leads to the same people. So you just kind of felt like you were always just in the background amongst this huge crowd of people. And it was just like not really that, it was fun. But like after a while, I was like, I'm tired of this. So yeah, that's why I ended up looking elsewhere. But it's true. Like I definitely saw that there's, politics, favoritism, all that stuff, in there from a, even just in the high school level.
And having access to the city like that with the school in Harlem and with Broadway, did that affect you in terms of even that sense of connection? Because I know that oftentimes when people grow up, if they don't have access to like a metropolitan area, I mean, Manhattan is also just, it's on another level in terms of production with the arts. Do you think that gave you a sense of professionalism? Like these things could be a career because you would see people who did it.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely felt like, okay, wow, like if I, take it seriously, a lot of the people who were teaching me classes at the Harlem School of the Arts were, also professional performers in some way or another. And, yeah, like I feel like once I broadened out of just doing community theater or just the high school theater in my high school to like going into another community where it was, you have to obviously spend money on it. So there's a sense of like access there. But yeah, you were exposed to more people who had those, connections, who had been doing this for a long time, and maybe now they're teaching. And so it was pretty cool to see that. Yeah, that this was possible. I knew it was hard though. So yeah, but it was possible.
Does it come with a sort of pressure? I mean, I talk to so many adults now who they do some kind of craft, whether it's writing or something else. They go on Instagram and they're like, oh, like there's all these people who do things more obsessively than I do. Did that ever play into when you were going to Harlem? Anywhere where like, oh my gosh, like look at the quote unquote competition, even if you didn't think they were competition.
Well, I think the benefit almost was back then there was no social media. So I didn't know like who the competition was. Like I only met people if I went to some sort of program, or like I remember I did another like 2 week summer program at SUNY Oswego, like upstate New York. They had like a 2 week theater thing for high school kids. And I remember going there and being like, okay, wow, like some of these kids are like way more talented and like way more committed to this. And that was kind of like the start of me being like, wow, okay, like I don't know if I'm like quite in it as much as they are. Like I enjoyed it, but like I think the commitment, I could see that was kind of the first exposure, but that was very much an in-person getting to see people in real life thing. It was not, I didn't have social media access. So there was, I mean, I guess I could have seen people in my high school, but yeah, I think at a certain point I kind of stopped paying attention to what they were up to. So yeah, but I think that is true. I bet for today's kids who are exposed to like being able to see how, kids who are aspiring to be in these different fields or what they're doing online, and they're showing pictures or video of them doing it online. You can see the competition right in front of your face. Maybe I would have quit sooner, if I'd seen that. Because I was kind of doing it for fun, like I kind of had this like big pipe dream of like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to be on Broadway? But really, I was just doing it because I enjoyed it. It was just fun, it was a fun way to spend my time.
Yeah, it feels like a weird duality where in some ways you get more access now to see behind the scenes and get tips than you ever would have before. And the other end, it's what you were saying is it can also maybe have a downside. Yeah. So what did you, after high school, what were you thinking of pursuing in terms of education, career, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So when I actually applied to colleges, I still thought like, okay, I've been doing all this theater, like I should go to a school and study theater. So I actually auditioned for 4 different college theater programs, like the BFA programs. And it all involved, you go into Manhattan and they have these like places where you show up and you are auditioning. I guess like, they come to New York and you can like,
I'm already nervous for you thinking of this.
That's when I really realized wow, okay, no. So I did it, the auditions, but it was not, I felt very not prepared, the way I should have been, even despite the fact that I took all these classes. Cause I think I just the level, I just don't think I quite realized the level I needed to be. And so, yeah, of course, I did not get into any of those programs. And I was really upset because I applied to 8 schools and that was 4 of the schools. And so I was like, okay, wow, now what? So luckily it worked out that I ended up getting into a school that I loved. I ended up going to Tufts University, and they have a great theater program just as an extracurricular thing. So, but by the time I think I went through this process, I realized I don't actually think I want to do this. This was actually a good learning experience, that this is not really what I want to do. So by the time I got to campus, I was like, you know what, I'll do, maybe I'll join a play as an extracurricular, but I'm just going to figure out what my major will be. And at that time, I think I realized, I think I want to do English as a major. I realized the other thing I really enjoyed was books. And, my mom was kind of like, well, if you like plays, and you like theater, you could always write plays. If you like writing or reading, you could always kind of tie that together. And so I thought about doing that. But I think I also realized, I've always liked books, even throughout this theater as a activity in high school and middle school. I always still was a big reader too in elementary school. So I just, didn't think of myself as an author at that time. So yeah, I think by the time I got to college and started taking English literature classes, I realized, no, this is much more my thing. I realized I was much more introverted. I think than, the typical actor needs to be. And so that's why I felt more comfortable being on the other side of things. And then when I took some creative writing classes, that's when I was like, okay, no, this is what I really enjoy. So when I first kind of made that choice, I think I realized I want to work in publishing. Like that would be great. So then I kind of started thinking about that. So, I even did an internship one of the summers in college at a publishing house. So that's I shifted gears to thinking about books and publishing at that point.
How was it in terms of getting the internship, and what did you experience with that? Because I always think that's a really unique kind of lens into what will later become your career.
Yeah, so I got lucky. My dad actually helped me he knew somebody who worked at one of the publishers and was like able to, use that connection to help me, get one of the interviews for the internships they have during the summer. And it was great. And so I got to work, at the time it was like Time Warner Books, which is now I guess got switched to Hachette. Anyway, so so I got to work with one of the editors, like just as their little intern, and I got to just read a whole bunch of random stuff, and it was very much like low level stuff, but it was cool because they kind of would teach us stuff. They would gather all the interns and put us in a conference room and tell us about different aspects of publishing while we were there, and we all got to get to know each other, and I got that experience of like taking the train to the city to go to this job. You felt like a real official employee. So it was great. I loved it. And then that was the summer before senior year. So then during senior year, when it was kind of that time to start thinking about jobs after college, I immediately just started applying to like as many publishing houses as I could. So definitely was like a really positive experience.
Were you actually in the Time Warner building on Central Park?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Well, it was on 6th Avenue, like kind of near Rockefeller Center. Like that area.
Okay.
So not. Yeah. It was great. I mean, they had an awesome cafeteria. It was like, I felt like such like a cool, they had all these free magazines because it was also like sharing the building with all these different publications. It definitely was a really cool thing to do at such a young age, like, and just still in college.
So right when you're senior year into graduating, so you're applying to publishers, how was that process in terms of figuring out where to apply, getting interviews, all of that?
So I think I think this is the interesting thing. So a lot of people, when they want to go into publishing, think I want to work in editorial. And I think I thought the same thing. My internship was in editorial. I think it's just the first thing you think of. And since I enjoyed my internship, I was like, okay, let's do this. So I definitely used my internship as best as I could. I would reach back out to the people I worked with there and said, hey, like, do you have any, recommendations for anything? I think I had even from somebody's advice, like set up some informational interviews where like you ask if you could just kind of come and talk to them about like what kind of jobs might be available, even if there isn't a job available, because it's a good opportunity just to kind of you can get to know what they do, and also they can get to know you. So if something does pop up, they might reach out. And then finally, I remember I graduated. I still didn't have a job yet. It was like the summer, that summer after college, and I was still, without a job yet, but just applying. And finally, I ended up getting a job as an associate. Like they had this rotational associate program at Simon & Schuster where entry-level employees would come in and they get to rotate around different departments over the course of a year or 18 months. And so I ended up getting into that program, which was great because it's very much like an introduction to publishing, similar to an internship where you're there full time, but you're spending maybe 6 months with a different department and you help them out, and then you switch over to another one and you help them out. So I ended up doing that. And so I started out in editorial, and then I ended up switching to marketing, which I really enjoyed. And then I was supposed to switch to a third department, but then I ended up switching to I ended up finding a full-time job there, because really the way the program works is after that rotation's over, if there's nothing available full-time, you just have to go find a job somewhere else, because it's really only that contract, right? So I saw a list, or somebody told me about something in-house that was available full-time. So I ended up applying to that before I got to my third rotation. And actually it was ended up being the assistant to an associate publisher for one of the adult imprints. So it was cool. And so then that really got me a chance to see like a whole lot about publishing, because you're like really kind of getting to see a lot of aspects of it from that kind of central publisher's office. So it was a really great learning experience. I loved it.
I feel like that should be a mandatory thing between high school and college for every industry. Like, you want to go into plumbing, we're going to do a year-long rotational into all the aspects of the plumbing and HVAC. Like, what a cool experience. I love that.
Well, because I think it kind of goes to show, like, you think you want editorial because that's what a lot of people think, but then you realize as you're going around, you're like, oh wait, there's actually interesting aspects about these other departments, and I may not have even known about them had I not gotten the chance to try them out, for a period of time. And or just get a chance to talk to other people for a period of time before you're kind of stuck in a job, so it's great. And I think they still do it. I mean, at least I worked at Simon & Schuster for 7 years total, and I think at least by the time I was leaving, I'm pretty sure they still had different groups coming in for that. And it's great for them because they can just kind of have a contracted group and get help in all these different departments,
That's really cool. So what was that first job, and then how did it evolve in terms of what you were learning and what you were doing?
Well, one really cool thing about the first job is I was assigned to the children's division. And I, in college, realized when I was taking creative writing classes, I kind of realized that I wanted to write for kids. I kind of made this shift because I took this elective literature class my senior year called Girls Books. And it basically was the professor had us reading a bunch of different books for children featuring female protagonists. And we kind of talked about like themes in feminism or themes of like, when this was written, like how are women portrayed now versus that, things like that. So we read like Little Women all the way to like Judy Blume or Harriet the Spy and then, Bridget Terabithia, things like that. And I remember, like, as I was reading these books, being like, oh my gosh, I loved these books as a kid. And, reading books at a young age really meant a lot to me. And so then one of our final assignments was to, like, do a creative writing assignment where we write from the perspective of a young girl. And so doing that creative writing assignment made me realize, oh my gosh, this has been way more fun than what I'd been writing in my other creative writing classes, writing about, like, married people, and I was like 18, 19 years old, thinking you had to write about older people. I wasn't thinking like I should write about people my age, like, because you're reading short stories about these more other things. So in my brain, I was thinking, oh, I have to write this. So then I shifted to writing. I wanted to write for younger kids. So while I was doing this program at Simon & Schuster in the children's division, I took the opportunity to read as many of the books that they had, because you can, as an employee, you had access to all these books. So I used it as an opportunity to really learn about like what is, children's publishing specifically all about, just trying to take advantage of all the books that I had, like learning about picture books versus novels, and things like that. It was really cool. And so then in the back of my mind too, I was thinking, okay, I also want to like keep some of this stuff in mind if I want to write, some of these books. So I ended up taking a creative writing class in the city around that same time at Gotham Writing School, which is like one of those popular schools they had in person. They also do them online, but at the time I went in person, and it was a children's writing class. And I just did it, after work, one day a week or something. And that teacher had gone to the new school MFA program. And so she kind of introduced me to that program idea. And I was like, oh. And then she invited all the kids in the class, if they wanted to go to a reading where several alumni from that program were going to be doing a reading. And so I went and got a chance to talk to a couple of the alumni, ask them questions. And then that's why I decided to apply to that program. So, so that kind of, I feel like it was like a combination of the Simon & Schuster Children's Division, placement, plus that girls' books class, plus taking this other class, learning about, it kind of all was happening at the same time. So by the time I ended up getting into that program and joined the program, I felt like I just feel like I was immersed in like children's books and things like that.
It's such a testament to showing up and being around and just being around other people in an industry. I think a lot of people, they have a lot of social fear as just human beings. I mean, we all do it our own way. And I always think of like we kind of logically rationalize, well, I'm going to observe the industry from over here because I'm like, I can't go over there and talk to these people. I'm an introvert. But as you taking the classes and doing these things, it makes these connections where now the people and things and these wonderful opportunities come up. Of course, you're working really hard the entire time.
Right.
So
it kind of goes to show that people. Oh, no, I was just going to say it also goes to show that people are really willing to be nice and answer your questions and help you. Like, I think that's definitely something I learned. I mean, even just with that teacher inviting us to that reading, at that reading, one of the alumni was so nice that I was emailing her about the program, like for a little bit after that, to think when I was thinking about applying. So she was answering my questions, and like you just realize that people in the industry are really nice. You just have to, like you said, take the chance and be willing to ask for it or put yourself out there a little bit.
So you're working a job at Simon & Schuster while also pursuing your MFA at the same time? Okay,
Yes,
so
because the new school program allowed it. It's like all at night. So yeah, it was hard, but it's possible.
and you focus the MFA on writing for children, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is one of those things I'm so curious about, where you're working inside a publisher, you're working around at least or on books that are for children. You are inspired. What is it about you that said, on top of this, I have this full-time job, I'm inside publishing, I'm learning, I've got the passion. Now I need to go spend a whole bunch of money, spend all of my evenings doing this to get a degree. What was it about that that felt so compelling to you?
I think I felt like I knew some of what you needed to do to be published by working in publishing, but I needed the other side of it. Like I needed the help with my actual writing. Like I wanted somebody to like look at what I was working on and tell me how to make it better. I had never written a novel before. Up to this point, I was only writing short stories in college. And when I took that class in the city, that little, the Gotham class, that was just a 10-week class. We weren't writing an entire novel. I wrote maybe just like a few chapters of something, but I really wanted to kind of have that help, like how do I even begin writing a novel? I still felt like such a newbie. So I think like for sure an MFA is not at all a requirement. I think for me at that time, I had always kind of thought I would get a master's too. It was just sort of in the back of my mind, like a master's would be cool to get. My parents have masters, it was just something in my head that was like furthering my education is not necessarily a bad thing. So yeah, I did like get a little bit of a scholarship, so that was helpful. But yeah, I did take out loans and was kind of like, I think this will be worth it. Now, I will say my journey to get published took a lot longer than just graduating with this MFA. So there were definitely moments, like it was like a decade, I would say, between. There were moments where I was like, oh my gosh, did I just waste all that money and I haven't even gotten published yet? So there are moments, but I think, looking back, I really did gain a lot of connections from the program. It was just a really great experience to, again, even further immerse myself, not just in the side of publishing, but in the writer side, because at my job, I wasn't talking to anybody about writing. I kind of kept it separate. I was learning as much as I could, but I was really there to be an employee and think about the other authors' books. So it was an opportunity to meet other writers and get a chance to learn more about that side of things and immerse myself in that part of it. So it was worth it, but yes, I definitely, it's a choice that some people choose not to make because it is expensive. But I think it being in the city too was just great because it was just like, we got to go to readings together. There's so many people in publishing that were able to come speak to us. It was just great. I don't regret it.
It's such a good point too, where I think sometimes because it's expensive and it's a real resource commitment, you think of like, what am I going to learn? How can I learn it another way? But what you just said of being a part of a group of people, of socializing, building the network, going places together, that feels like this thing that's difficult to put a price on, that is such a special part of any program.
Right, exactly. And just the writing help. I mean, we had these workshops where you're really getting into the nitty gritty about how to make yourself a better writer. And I could have kept paying for the smaller classes, but I felt like this one, it made me feel like a level up. It wasn't just beginners. It was like people who, were, even if you were a beginner in the sense of you hadn't started a novel yet, you had been doing some sort of writing for a while. And so you knew what plot was, you knew what characters were. You just wanted to get into like, how do I put all this together in the right way? It was a different level, the workshops than any of the classes I'd taken before. So it did feel like it was an opportunity to kind of level up for myself. But yeah, it was great.
I mean, you use that word immersion, and it's something that I think, like, I'm 48 right now, and that's a word that I'm appreciating more and more, this idea. When we talk about craft, any kind of craft, there are like levels, exactly as you're saying. And it's that idea of immersion is where the magic happens, but it takes such a stronger commitment. So it's so inspiring to hear how you were doing this, especially at such a young age.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. I feel like I had the time to put in the commitment because I think I joined the program maybe 2 years after I graduated college. So, I felt like I could deal with the stress of juggling everything. I had no other real commitments, so it felt doable. I mean, it was definitely challenging because there were some people in my program who did not have jobs. Like they just went, into the program and then during the day they could just write all day and then they would come to our night classes while I was having to work all day, come to the night classes, which were only 2 nights a week. So at least you had the other 3 nights and your weekends off. But still, some of those other nights you might go to a reading or an event. But yeah, and then I had to squeeze in all the writing on the weekends and things. So it definitely taught me. But I think it was a good experience too, in the sense because like once you go out into the real world, that's what it's like. Like for all those years afterwards, I had to figure out how to squeeze it in. So it was kind of a good opportunity to learn how to do it from the very beginning.
So you said you were at Simon & Schuster for about 7 years. What was that kind of journey like? I'm not sure if you're moving between imprints or moving different jobs or whether.
I ended up switching. I think I had 3 different jobs there. So I had the first rotational associate job. Then I was the assistant to an associate publisher for one of the adult imprints. So I switched over to the adult side. And then I ended up in sales, actually, because Simon & Schuster and a lot of the big publishers have these distribution clients, smaller publishers that they distribute books for and help, like the SNS sales force sells the books for these publishers, and they have an agreement. So I worked in that division. And so my job was to sort of be the liaison between several of these smaller publishers and our sales team. And a lot of the smaller publishers I was assigned to were the children's publishers. So I kind of got to return to children's books, but for these smaller publishers, and help kind of, be the one to help make sure that they were getting what they needed and sales was getting what they needed. And it was actually really fun because I feel like you got to see, again, it was like an opportunity to see like so many different sides of publishing because I was there to kind of help both sides. I really enjoyed that one. That was actually where I spent the most time. I think that was, each other job was only a year or so. And then that one was the last 5 years. And the only reason I left publishing was because I moved. I moved to Connecticut. And so then it was just the commute got to be too long and I just couldn't do it anymore. So that's the only reason why I left. But I loved it.
Because you've been on both sides of being, an author and inside publishing, do you have any perspective on how you think other writers view publishing? Because I mean, there's so much out there, and it's like, well, publishers think like the publisher, you walk in the building, there's like someone in charge, and everyone's like just like that is. I mean, to me, publishing is this ridiculously complex company, like any company is, with tons of different divisions and subdivisions and everything you just described. I bet people listening didn't know that role existed, that was a thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think probably the biggest surprise to people is maybe just how many people touch a single book, in the publishing house, especially if it's done in-house. I mean, the distribution clients, we only got involved once the book was about to be sold into different bookstores and accounts and things. But if you're there from the beginning, you have the editorial team, you have the managing editorial team who's like formatting and, copy editing and all that stuff. And then you have like marketing, publicity, subrights, legal, I don't know, corporate communications, like things like that. You're like, what is that even? And I remember like corporate communications, but it's a company, it's a corporation. So they have to have things like that. Like, of course, there's the CEO and like the executive, like kind of the executive people, like the chief financial officer, like there's all these different roles that I don't think you realize when you're just trying to get your book published. And even, and like all those salespeople who are touching your book, who are getting a chance to see what your book is and have to sell it somewhere. Yeah, just all these different people. Like you said, all these different roles that you wouldn't even think about.
So after you got the MFA, did you come out of that with like, I've got a book idea? When did sort of the books that you ended up publishing, when did they begin? Or were there books before that like had to...
There were books before. Yeah. So I started a novel in the program, finished it after, and sent it out, to all these different literary agents. Felt very confident in myself because I was like, there's so many alumni who have like come out of this program publishing their books right away. Like, I'm surely going to be one of those people. And then that didn't happen, even though, I got a lot of really great feedback and a lot of requests and things from agents. So I felt like, they liked my writing, but I think I kind of realized it's not always about the writing. It's about, do you have the story that's marketable? And, a lot of the comments I got on my first novel was like, it's too quiet. And so like having to realize, okay, you have to write something that's going to fit the market and kind of stand out. So that was kind of a learning experience too. And then I ended up writing 2 other books that also went nowhere until I wrote the book that became my debut. So it was the 4th novel that I ever wrote. And years later, I think I started it in 2016 and I graduated from the MFA program in 2010. So 6 years later, I finally started writing the book that became my debut. But in between, I'd been writing other projects that did not go anywhere.
So I always feel like this is such a difficult thing because I was the art kid growing up and my wife is an artist and my friends have always been the creative people. You work on a project and you believe in it and you fight through it and you revise it and you do all the things and you put it out there and you pitch it and you get a little interest and nothing works out. What is that like to then say, okay, that beautiful, awesome project is going to sit over here. Now there's a new project, and then that one, the same thing. Okay, that one's going to sit over here. What is that like to kind of keep trying again? Where do you get that kind of motivation to say, here's my third idea, here's my fourth idea?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the community that I started making at the MFA program and continued making through, joining organizations like SCBWI, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. I went to a couple of Writers Digest conferences. I would just go to like these different conferences, at least one a year, and just different, and joining different groups. At that point now, social media was much more part of my life. And so on Twitter and things like that, meeting other writers. I think at that time too, like blogging was a much bigger thing. So I would be blogging and then you meet other bloggers and you comment and you just become friends. And so you realize like we're all kind of going through similar things, and just realizing like we're all kind of experiencing this, and that the only way, there's just so many inspirational stories out there. Like there's a lot of stories from authors saying like, you just got to keep going. The only difference between somebody who's published and somebody who's not is that the published person just kept going. And so you kind of keep those in the back of your head. I would like take, when I go to those conferences, I would really pay close attention to those keynotes where they're really trying to inspire you to keep going, and just take that to heart, and just continuing to try to get better, like continuing to take those workshops, and you use my critique partners to just keep workshopping things. And I just felt like I knew my writing was good. I just knew that I needed to find the right story, and I just needed to keep going to figure that out. But yeah, I think what kept me going was honestly the community that I had joined, and just seeing that other writers around me were going through the same thing, and a lot of them were able to overcome it and able to get there. Seeing several people before me able to get those agents and book deals, I'm like, oh my gosh, if you can do it, I can do it, that kind of thing.
So was it different writing that fourth book? Was there something about that in you or in the market that you're like, oh, this one's different, this one's taking off?
I think I just realized that it felt very like that elusive high concept you're always trying to look for, that I always struggled to find because I was writing like quieter, contemporary young adult novels before this. This one I felt like, oh, wow, I think this actually has more of that like hook that like everybody wants, in your query letter and things like that. And so as I like came up with it, I was like, I think this is like more interesting. And then as I workshopped it with, I was writing it and sharing it with my critique partners, like they were way more excited about it. And then I took it to, when I was going to, a couple of conferences and stuff over the year or so that I was working on it, I would get critiqued by, one of the professionals there, like an editor or something, and they would have really great things to say about it. So I was like, okay, I think this is like, they're not going to say it's quiet, because I knew that it wasn't quiet. Like I think I'd finally like found an idea that like stood out. And so I think, yeah, I did, as I was working on it, I think I realized like this, if I can pull this off, like is a much stronger idea. And I just felt better. So I wasn't that surprised that once I did go through the process of getting it published, it was a much easier process for me.
It's something I don't want listeners to miss, is that here you are creating something and you have critique partners, you're bringing it to conferences and putting it in front of people, not just to get it, hope they buy it or something, but like to work on it. And I feel like that's such a sign of a professional, is like, I'm not coveting and hiding this. I'm getting feedback all the time.
It's tough, but yeah, I mean, paying for, if you can afford to pay the extra, whatever, sometimes it's not even that much, like $25 or something, to have somebody read the first 5 pages of something, just to see if you feel like, if they feel like your idea and your beginning is in a good space, like it's worth it, because that feedback can really turn things around for you. So I definitely took advantage when I could of those opportunities.
So did you have an agent at the time? What was the publishing path for this?
So no, I didn't have an agent. I kept trying to get an agent over all of those many years with other projects, and I did not manage to find one. Again, like close calls.
Can I just ask, and you might not know the number, do you have the number of like how many rejections you got or anything like that?
Well, I ended up not querying. So the first book, I think I queried maybe 60 or so agents over the course of like
60.
a year or two. Yeah.
Okay.
And all of them obviously in the end rejected it. And the second book, I ended up not even really querying, because I think when I wrote it and started to revise it, I realized like, I don't even think I like this that much anymore. So I workshopped it a lot. Like I still took it to those conferences and would have people give me feedback. But then I think when it came time to actually make fixes to it, I was like, I don't even think I'm passionate about this anymore. So I kind of moved on. And the third book is actually kind of a separate story. I got the opportunity to try writing a book for a book packager, which is basically, for anybody listening who doesn't know, is basically like an outside company who comes up with the idea, pays the author to write that idea, and then pitches it to publishing houses. And so I got the chance to work on this book, which ultimately did not go anywhere for other reasons, but I wrote it, and that kind of took some time to write and revise. I learned a lot, though, through writing and revising it. But as a result of the fact that it wasn't my intellectual property, I could not do anything with it. So that also got put to the side, because once it didn't get to the next step of being pitched to a publisher, mainly because of the packager kind of decided that they didn't want to move forward with it. Then it was like I couldn't do anything with it, so I had to just write another book of my own. So so that I would say maybe I queried a total of maybe like 70 or so, because I did query, I think, a few people for that second book.
So 70 total between all the books.
Something like that. Yeah, I would say maybe like something like that. It's been a long time since I looked at the list, but
yeah. So you got an agent. Of
course, but that doesn't count for my debut, though. That was pre-writing what became my debut. For my debut, I only queried maybe about like 15 people before I was able to get an offer from that. So that was actually much lower number and much faster process overall.
That's exciting. So what was the publication process like?
It was fun. I think for me, because I kind of knew now what kind of goes into it. I was less stressed. I think a lot of the debuts that I've met, in the year or so leading up to its publication, a lot of the debut authors kind of find each other, and we get into like a Facebook group or something, so you can kind of commiserate about what's going on before the book is even out. And a lot of them are like, oh, like, I don't know what's going on. And I'm like, well, I kind of like know a little bit of what's going on behind the scenes. So that made me feel less stressed about it and more just excited to see what it was going to look like from an author's point of view now. So yeah, it was pretty smooth. I mean, a couple of hiccups along the way, like my editor left, soon after it got picked up. So we did go through the editorial process together. Like the 2 developmental edits still was with that original editor. So that felt good. But then by the time it went to copy edits, it was a new editor. But I really like her. So that worked out. Sometimes these situations don't always work out for the author, but this worked out perfectly fine. And the publisher was really supportive. So I got lucky because I know that sometimes you get published and then a lot of authors just feel like, okay, well, I'm automatically your mid-list author, and so therefore I'm only getting a little bit, but my publisher really stood behind this book a lot. So I had a really great experience. So the only real big hiccup was the fact that it came out in 2020. But luckily in January, so I was able to have a couple of months of normalcy as a debut author, but then of course the pandemic hit. And so that was having to navigate shifting everything over to online and not being able to go into anything in person. I was supposed to go on a book tour, like the inaugural shelf stuff, which is like the middle grade kids branding of HarperCollins. They were going to have the shelf stuff tour where I was going to be included with 2 other authors, and we had to cancel it, so, sad things, but like overall though, I feel like I had a good experience. And my book still did okay despite, the pandemic.
Yeah, it seemed to get picked up by a lot of places, a lot of really good reviews, and picked by this pub and that pub, that sort of thing.
Right.
Do you have any way to talk about your perspective on how it got shared? Was it just, had a great publicist marketing team? Was it this topic really hit off? Was it something else? Do you have any way to kind of reflect on that?
It was a combination. Yeah, definitely a combination of those. So one thing is HarperCollins has this internal program called the lead read, which is where they choose, like the sales team like votes on what they want to be the lead read of the season. And I guess they pick one adult title and one kids title. And mine was lucky to become the lead read for its season. And so that means that like the sales team they stood behind it. And like I got to go, this is pre-pandemic, I got to go in person and talk to the sales team. And so they were excited already. And I think there's been a lot of discussion on Twitter about how it's frustrating for authors when publishers will hold your sales against you, but like really it's up to the publisher to really make the difference. There's only so much an author can really do. And sometimes you feel like you're shouting into the void, especially during a pandemic year where it's like everybody's online talking about their books. So it's how do you stand out? So the publishers, it's like they're the ones who make you stand out. Like they're the ones, buying ads in the, the publications. They're the ones paying for placement here and there, or doing, different things that I can't personally do. But they can do, and they can move the needle. And so that was part of it. I think the fact that it was a lead read definitely helped me. And then the other thing is, this has kind of been like a weird, bittersweet thing, but the book came out, and a few months later, George Floyd was murdered, and the whole Black Lives Matter had a resurgence. And because of the themes of my book being about injustice and incarceration and systemic racism, some of those themes are in there. It also was included on some lists around that time. And I think a lot of people really wanted to read more books about these kinds of topics and also read books with their kids about these topics. So I think that helped it get a little bit more attention, which obviously is kind of a weird thing because you're like, you don't want it to be for such a sad reason, but I'm grateful that it was there for those families and teachers who wanted to use a book like this in the classroom. So yeah, I think it kind of just, teachers just really embraced the topic and as a way to talk to their kids about this kind of stuff. So I think that just, I think part of it is that it was timely. And I think the other part of it is that my publisher really did do a lot to push it out there. So I feel fortunate.
We've referred to it as a debut, but this is from the desk of Zoe Washington. I don't think we've said the title yet. So at what point were you working on the follow-up, which comes out later this year, A Soft Place to Land?
Yeah, so I started writing it before From the Desk of Zoe Washington came out because it was a 2-book deal with HarperCollins. So once I finished, the main copy edits and all those things, and there's still months to go before the book's coming out, I then started the conversation with my editor about what book 2 would be about, and we kind of went back and forth, and then I started working on it. So I think I had handed in the first draft before the book, my debut, came out. So I finished the first draft, which was great. But then I had to edit it mostly after From the Desk of Zoe Washington came out. And actually, my editor and I ended up realizing we wanted to make this really big change to the story. So it involved a lot of rewriting. So I think like half the book had to be rewritten. So I had to do that like during kind of the earlier months of the pandemic. So that was definitely stressful and hard to juggle. But yeah, so I kind of had to learn how to juggle promoting a book while also writing another book. And that sophomore book struggle that a lot of authors experience was definitely a thing that I experienced too. Like, especially knowing that my book had just come out, kind of in a really good spot. My publisher had made it the lead read. Their expectations are high for the next book, right? And so I think that was also in the back of my mind. It was definitely challenging. But you get through it, and I am proud of it in the end. So,
are you approaching this launch any differently than you did the first one?
I think it just feels a little bit more like, I think at that time I was able to just put all of my focus on the launch. So I was thinking at all times, like, okay, like I'm going to, this is what I'm going to do on social media. Like I'm going to plan these kind of in-person events. And then of course my publisher is planning different things. Now it's like, I'm working on my 3rd book while I'm waiting for this one to come out. And I'm not even through the first draft. And so it's like, I'm really trying to juggle, like, how do I actually get work done? So I do feel like in a way my social media has and we're still in this pandemic. I mean, things are still, challenging in terms of now, luckily things are opening up now where I can go to a coffee shop. For the longest time, I had to work from home with my virtual learning child at home, and it's really hard to find ways to get it in. But now it's like I can leave the house safely more now. So that's good. But yeah, I think it's just like you have to juggle the writing now and the actual next book. Writing From the Desk of Zoe Washington before I had a book deal and an agent, like I could take my time. I could like get as many critique partners as I wanted to read it. Now it's like I barely have enough time to have one person read it before I hand it to my editor. It's like it's such a different timeline. I'm writing on deadline now, so it's like a different experience. But I'm still grateful for it. But yeah, it's harder.
It's such an interesting point because I watch a ton of documentaries on famous music albums and movies, and it's a very similar thing where the auteur, the person who did the first movie, it was a vision for 20 years. Then the second movie or the second album had to be out in 18 months.
Exactly. And yeah. So that's why you're like, I understand now why a lot of people's second books may not be, especially, even in a series, I can see how like you're probably rushed to write those second books. So a lot of times people say, oh, the second books in a lot of series are never that great. But now I can totally understand why they may not be as good because you have such limited time. They really want to like take advantage and have these books come out as quickly as possible.
Do you have that thing where you're also trying to figure out, well, what's my book? What's my thing? Is it this kind of character, this kind of story? Do you go through questions like that?
Yeah, I did. Because the first From the Desk of Zoe Washington is like a mystery story. There's a mystery in there. And so when it came to coming up with the second book, actually the reason why I ended up rewriting a large chunk of it is because we decided to add a mystery. So there was no mystery in the first draft, and then we were like, I think this needs something. Let's add a mystery. And so we added a mystery, and that involved a lot of rewriting because, of course, mysteries come with all these different elements you have to include. And then for the third book, I was like, well, is that my thing now? Does everything have to be a mystery? And so I'd really been racking my brain of other mystery ideas. And ultimately, my publisher and I came up with another idea that it's not a mystery. But, I think I kind of realized that I don't necessarily have to write all mysteries. I can write some, but I think it's a lot of the other themes like that are also in the book, like family, friendship, like a girl who has a lot of passion for something. Like those are the kind of things that are in so far in all the books that I'm writing now, even if it's not all the same kind of story structure of a mystery. So yeah, that definitely was something I grappled with. And even just on a simple scale, like pitching the third book, you have to kind of think, like I had in my mind, like you want them to be happy with what you're pitching, right? So like I was in a situation where I could pitch on proposal, which like not everybody does, but like, so I'm sending them a concept and then they're going to sign the book contract based on this concept and they'll have to write it. So in doing these proposals, I was like, I was realizing like they really want me to come up with something just as like big and, bold as my debut, and it's like, what if I can't like that, what if I can't keep up with that? So it definitely feels stressful, like I want to always be, you can't really come out with a quiet book after that. It's like, you can't like it's just the publisher really wants you to keep going with your momentum. So you have to kind of keep coming up with more big pitches and higher concept, so there's pressure around that. That makes me feel a little bit stressed, but I mean, I feel like one book at a time, I've been able to figure it out. So I guess I'll just try to think about one book at a time instead of my whole career worth of books for now.
Smart. All right, so we've covered a lot. Is there anything I haven't asked about that you think we should cover along any of these themes, creativity, publishing, anything?
No, I mean, I think the other thing is really just one thing when I talk to other authors is really just talking about how the journey can be really long sometimes, and that's okay. I mean, I do this a lot in school visits. I talk to them about how success is not always a straight line. It's like that squiggly line, and there are lots of ups and downs and twists and turns, but really the only way you can get through it is just to keep going. And it's kind of like the theater reminded me, like, with theater, I was able to realize, like, once it kind of got hard, I was like, you know what? No, like, I don't have it in me. I'm seeing all these other people going way further than me and doing so much more and have so much more passion for it. And I was really thinking about this as like a hobby, kind of like maybe a career, but I hadn't been as intense about it. And with writing, I realized like, oh no, I am willing to like do much more. So I think think about that. Like, are you able to go further? Like, and if you don't, that's fine. Like, you could just write for fun. You don't have to be an author. But I think like sometimes it really does take a lot of that taking the extra steps, and like getting your work critiqued if you can, like finding ways to go to conferences and meeting other writers and things like that. And or even just simple thing as like reading craft books and just trying to like just get better. But yeah, like all those years of hard work, like were totally worth it. And now I'm so happy that my debut was my debut and not one of those previous books, because I'm like, I just feel like it's the best book I've written. So like, sometimes you look back and you're like, oh, I'm so happy that it took me this long, and I learned so much too. So I felt even more prepared for some of the author stuff just because I had other author friends go through this before me. So I got to hear from them, like even way before I got an agent, what it's like, to work with an editor. So I kind of had that in the back of my mind. So yeah, it's not necessarily a bad thing for it to take a long time is basically my point. So I think if anybody is listening and feels discouraged, just know that like sometimes like the journey, it works itself out and it's worth it to have that extra time to just be learning and getting better at your craft.
I love that. Thank you so much for taking the time. This has been amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. It was fun to talk about the different aspects of the journey that I don't always get to talk about.
You can find Janae Marks at janaemarks.com, over on Twitter at Janae Marks Books, and on Instagram at Janae Marks Books as well. You can find her books from the desk of Zoe Washington and A Soft Place to Land, wherever books are sold. My name, again, is Dan Blank. You can find me on social media at Dan Blank or on my website at wegrowmedia.com. Thank you so much for listening until the end.